Why are these things so hard to put on? So fun to knit, so hard to wear. And yet I can't stop, I don't know. Welcome or welcome back to my knitting channel. My name is Nadine and you can find me at yourknittingbestie on Instagram, Ravelry and here on YouTube. On this channel, I like to talk about what it's like to be a sort of obsessed knitter in Brisbane, Australia, where the weather, as you can kind of see, is usually pretty hot and sunny, but I never let that hold me back. So today we're talking about Sophie Scarf alternatives. And I think a lot of people have heard of the Sophie Scarf. It is somewhat infamous at this point, I think. I actually just looked it up on Ravelry and I can't believe it has, what, I think 15,000 projects on Ravelry. That's crazy. I can't believe so many people have knit it, but it is a bit of a sensation. And here in Brisbane, I have to say, I struggle to find opportunities to wear the Sophie Scarf. I occasionally wear it like this into the office as a bit of a pop of colour, but I find it to be really challenging to style with my outfits, to be completely honest. But for some reason, that has not held me back at all from knitting so many Sophie scarves. I think I've knit maybe 5 or 6 Sophie scarves in total. This is the first one I'd ever knit, and it's with Cardiff cashmere. This is the nicest yarn I've ever used, and one of the most luxurious pieces I have in my self-made wardrobe. And this is actually the only one that I have kept. I've given away every other Sophie scarf that I've knit, but I continue to be obsessed with them. But I really want to find something a little bit different to knit for my next one, because I am planning to knit one using a special skein of yarn which I talked about in my last podcast, this lovely speckled blue sort of colour yarn. I'm planning to use that to knit one more small neck scarf for one of my cousins in Canada. So I'm looking for something that has the familiar, very neat edges that you see on the Sophie Scarf. I'm looking for something that has that sort of similar shape. So I don't mind if it goes from tapered end and then increases in sort of like that one side triangle for that elongated triangle shape, or if it increases initially and then goes to a flat section before decreasing. I think that would look really nice as well. And the reason I love these scarves, and the reason I'm on the hunt for another pattern like the Sophie Scarf, is because I think it is so fantastic to get through your stash. And that's what I've been doing with the Sophie Scarves that I've been making furiously in the background of any other knit for the last little while. I've just been using bits and bobs to put together the scarf. And I think it's just a beautiful project and a nice gift knit in particular. So it also goes hand in glove with one of my other intentions, which is to start knitting gift knits much earlier this year. So those are the sorts of things I'm looking for in, what I was looking for when I put together these patterns for you. I do think if you have the Sophie Scarf and you've knit a couple, you probably can come up with alternatives without having to buy different patterns. So in my mind, if you're familiar with the construction of the Sophie Scarf, you could keep the shell of the garment the same and substitute in a different stitch pattern instead of just the garter the whole way through, the garter stitches. You could, for example, use any other stitch pattern which I guess lies flat and is reversible. That's the key thing, I guess. So you could alternate some garter stitches with some rib stitching. You could do a seed stitch, a moss stitch, really anything I think, and you could pretty easily sub it into the pattern, just maintaining those 3 stitches on either side for the built-in I-cord. So I think that would be pretty fun, but There are a lot of very smart designers out there who have jumped on this trend and put out some beautiful patterns that are reminiscent perhaps of the overall sensation of the Sophie scarf. So that's what I've put together. Before I do go in though, I would like to say that I'm not trying to imply at all that any of these designers are copying the Sophie scarf or anything like that. I think it's just that they saw a trend and they're jumping on it, because why wouldn't you? If something's blowing up that much as a designer, I think you probably do have to just go for it. So I think that's everything I want to say at the start. Oh, that's right. No, sorry. I have figured out how to do chapters. So if you'd like to jump ahead to a particular pattern, you should be able to do that along the bottom. The little progress bar should show the chapters, and there are timestamps down in the description box. And I'm also trying my best to include the details and links to everything I mention in my videos, in case you wanted to go have a look at a pattern or a particular yarn or anything like that. And for each of these patterns, I'm also going to quickly mention what sort of yarn I think would look beautiful, or what I would like to use with that particular pattern. And at the end, if you stick around that long, I'll tell you which pattern I'm planning to use myself for the next project. Okay, so the first pattern you have to mention when you're talking about alternatives to the Sophie scarf is The Simple Thing by Melinda Brell. And this is a perfect pattern because it is free, and it is a lovely pattern for those of you who might not want to buy the Sophie scarf for whatever reason, but you want something similar. This is the pattern I'd recommend for you, and it is very popular on Ravelry at the moment. Not 15,000 projects, but I think it has over 1,000 projects. And it looks similar to the Sophie scarf. That's all I'm going to say. It looks similar. It looks like it has the same I-cord edging, a very similar rate of increases perhaps. So it has, and the increases are along one side as well. So it has a very similar shape. But of course the designer does say on the Ravelry page that this is I think an alteration of one of her earlier patterns, which was a similar shape but in stockinette. So I think that comment is there to make it clear that it's using an idea she had before the Sophie scarf came out. And it looks to be a great one. So for this particular scarf, for the yarn, I would pretty much go crazy. Because it's such a simple stitch pattern, there's nothing too crazy going on. I think you could really get away with a highly variegated yarn, a speckled yarn, a really bright yarn. I think you could really go crazy with it because the stitch pattern isn't taking too much of the attention. So if it were me, I think I would probably, actually like the one back here, this really highly variegated yarn, I would probably reach for any skeins in my stash that were just a bit wild and that I didn't know what to do with, and I would use that to make something like The Simple Thing, or a couple more that I'm about to mention now. The next pattern is the Solo Scarf by a designer that I've been very intrigued by, Kadri. And I think this one is, about $10 in AUD. So this pattern, what drew me to it is the fact that she alternates between rows of garter and stockinette stitch to create a horizontal mock rib effect, which I think looks beautiful and means that you don't have to be doing ribbing, which I think for me personally is not my favorite thing to do. But you get that kind of look in this way, and it also has that built-in I-cord along the edges. I think it has the same sort of construction, so you start at one end, you increase along one side only, and you end up with an elongated triangle shape for your project. And personally, I really love that construction because you can use any amount of yarn that you have, and you can just weigh it at the start and then knit until you've used up around about half, maybe a smidge before you reach halfway, just in case, and then begin your decreases and end up with a project that I'm sure will be long enough to get at least once around your neck, and you can get through your stash that way. And I think the other great thing is this pattern says specifically that it is designed for any gauge of yarn. So I'm not sure if she deals with that, the mathematics or anything in her pattern, but I think that is something that remains true for most of these patterns that we're going to talk about, which is one of the reasons I love them. The fact that you can really use any gauge and just be comfortable with the fact that the scarf might be a little chunkier or a little finer based on what you choose to reach for, but it will probably be fine. I think you've got a wide margin of error for these scarves. Since this one is a reasonably simple stitch pattern, I think my yarn selection personally would be similar to what I just mentioned for the simple thing. I would go pretty wild myself. Because it's not like it has an all over lace pattern, it's not cables, it's nothing too busy. So I would instead go for a busy or a bright yarn myself. And I think that would look really, really nice. The next pattern is, I think, one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest pattern that I have in this roundup. So this is the scarf number 4 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. And I think it's around $5. So yeah, quite affordable as far as these patterns go, because I believe the rest are around the $10 mark. And this one has a lovely stitch pattern. So it is a couple of rows of garter stitches and then a couple of rows of ribbing. This is just going by the look of the photos. And I think this is a similar stitch pattern to what she has for one of her sweaters, which is going gangbusters at the moment. I'll put up a picture of the sweater. But I think this stitch pattern is quite popular at the moment, and for good reason, because it gives a really classic, elevated look to the scarf. And I think it would add some interesting texture. In terms of yarn choice, for me, because it looks so classic and timeless, I would probably lean more into a neutral for this pattern. So I believe in the pictures, yes, I remembered correctly, she's got sort of a dark brown color. I would go maybe a cream or a beige, maybe even a light blue. Could look... Guess you can see I like that in a little scarf. I think a light blue would look really nice though. So that's probably my suggestions on colour. I think this pattern is made for cashmere. That's the suggested yarn. So I guess this would actually be perfect to make this other pattern. But I think absolutely you could use a different fibre and it would still look absolutely lovely. I guess the thing with the cashmere is it has that sort of almost soft focus look to it. It just looks so soft and dreamy. And that does it. I mean, it's a beautiful fibre for a reason, right? Okay, so the next one is two that kind of go together. The first one is the Alex Scarf by Pernille Larsen. Sitting at around $10.45, and this one, this is a familiar shape. So this comes up in a couple other patterns where you start at the edge, the tapered end, and you increase for a little while, but then it's flat in the middle, and then you go to decrease. I think there's a couple benefits to that construction. The first is that because you stop increasing, and then you just knit flat for that middle section, you're using less yarn, so you could get a longer shape if you wanted to. And I don't know if you necessarily need the additional bulk which is created by the increases, although that increase does create those beautiful croissant sort of photos that you see all over Instagram, and that I love taking myself as well. And maybe you wouldn't get it as much with that flat section. But I think when you're wearing it, the kind of triangle shape doesn't really assist that much, because if you see the way I'm wearing it, the increase bit kind of just flips in on itself. So maybe you get, if you were in a climate where you were wearing this for warmth rather than fashion, which is not me, you might like the additional fabric for a bit of warmth. But I think for me, I don't think I would need it too much. And maybe you could, yeah, you could knit a longer scarf so you could wrap it around a couple more times or have it hang down a little bit more. So I think that is a benefit of this pattern. The other thing is that, yeah, because it's just flat in the middle, you can easily extend it or shorten it depending on how much yarn you have at hand. So it would be a super easy one to just bust through whatever quantity of yarn that you have. Because this one is another pretty simple pattern, I believe this one is 2x2 rib. So it'll lie nice and flat, might even be a slightly thicker fabric, which could be nice again for colder climates. Perhaps if you're down in Melbourne or Sydney, you might appreciate that thicker fabric. But since it's simple, I think you could go nuts again on the yarn choice. So it could look nice in a really bright statement color to kind of wrap around while you're wearing a denim jacket or a heavier winter coat, again, maybe for later in the year, if you're in Sydney or Melbourne or one of the cooler places around Australia. And there is a pattern which I'd like to mention at the same time because it's very similar to the one we just talked about. And it is the Grab and Go Scarf by Sweater Freak, which is a terrific name, absolutely outstanding. And that's also around $10, just a smidge under. And this one has a couple sizes, which is good. And it's again in the 2x2 rib. The key difference when you compare it against the Alex scarf, I want to say, is that the right name? Yes, the Alex scarf. When you compare this against the Alex scarf, the key difference is that the Grab and Go does have the triangular increases, so it continues increasing to at least the center of the garment before it begins decreasing. So it has the difference in shape, but it is very familiar or very similar because it is also 2x2 rib. So the yarn choices for me would have remained about the same. And in the reference photo, they've used a beautiful sort of cherry red color, which I think would be beautiful. This next one is absolutely stunning. And I've seen this one all over Instagram, and I've seen this stitch pattern repeated in other patterns by the same designer because she obviously knows that she's on to a winner and that she should make as many patterns with this style as possible. So this is the Minou Scarf. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And it has a beautiful cable pattern over it. And it just creates such a classic design. The thing that scares me off about this one is that it's in half fisherman's rib and then the cable stitches as well, which I think is half brioche. So if you've watched my first ever video, which is my 2024 knitting intentions, you would know that brioche is a gap in my skill set. And it's something that I do want to try, and maybe this is the project that I'll try it out on, because the pattern has 3 sizes. So there's one, the smallest size is a really cute headband, and then I think there's a smaller sort of shape like this, and then a larger shawl included in the same pattern. And actually, I think many of the patterns we talk about today have multiple sizes. Maybe I'll put that on the screen because I think I forgot to mention that for the first, the ones I've talked about so far. But I love the fact that they have different sizes in the same pattern because I think there was a little bit of perhaps a view in the knitting community that with the Sophie Scarf, that the instructions for the Sophie Shawl sort of should have been included in the one pattern. And I have to say I kind of agree with that because it looks like it's almost the exact same construction, maybe with just a different weight of yarn and obviously larger dimensions. So for me personally, I bought the Sophie Scarf, and then when it occurred to me that I had a little bit more yarn and perhaps I could make a bigger version, I went onto the Ravelry page for the Sophie Shawl, and just by looking at the information that was there on the project page about the type of yarn, the dimensions, all of that sort of thing, I could kind of reverse engineer what would be in the Sophie Shawl pattern. And then I ended up just using the Sophie Scarf pattern with whatever yarn I wanted to use to make bigger projects that looked like the Sophie Shawl. So I think for many of the patterns we've talked about today, they acknowledge that you could absolutely do the same thing if they were to just give you one set of instructions, but they've gone ahead and done the lovely thing of including multiple sizes, sometimes up to 3 sizes in the one pattern. And this Minou Scarf is one of those patterns. So it's actually great because it has the headband, the shawl, the headband, the scarf, and the shawl, and each of them, if you were to knit to the same dimensions using the same gauge, it looks like they're a really good size, because sometimes it can be difficult to get to the right exact dimensions for the scarf to look nice. I don't know if you found the same problem, but when I first started knitting scarves, I was like, how long are these supposed to be? I really don't know. And then they're always longer than I thought they should be. Anyway, so the Minou Scarf, I believe, is supposed to be held with a strand of mohair held double. And I think that that would be a good thing to do for this one. So if you do happen to have some mohair lying around in your stash, or maybe a Surrey alpaca if you don't like knitting with mohair, I think it would be nice to use it in this pattern because it gives it that soft focus look, sort of, you know, with the halo that kind of comes around the pattern, and it really elevates it and makes it look lovely. So I think that would be a nice one to do with this. And again, because it's more of a classic pattern in my mind, I would probably go for the neutrals again in this stitch pattern. And I'd go for a lighter color so that you can really see the cables and it doesn't get lost in a darker color. So the next pattern is the Barbara Shawl by Gregoria Fibers. And that one is sitting at around $12, so one of our more expensive patterns in this roundup. The thing that really drew me to this one is that sort of geometric pattern, that it looks almost 3D. And it seems that it looks complicated, but it says on the Ravelry page that the stitch pattern is totally fine for beginners. So I think that is really cool to get such an impactful visual effect with just a combination of knits and purls. I believe this one is broken garter stitch, which creates this pattern. And in terms of sizing, the designer has come out with one much smaller size, which she calls the bandana size, and then a much larger size for a shawl. But I really think, again, that you could knit to any size using the same pattern. And it looks from the Ravelry page that a lot of people have actually done that. So I found one that looked like it was more of a mid-size project, not quite as big as the shawl size, but also, you know, much bigger than just the bandana. So personally, I would go for this pattern because of the broken garter stitch effect. I think that that's a really interesting textural element to add to one of these mini scarves. And it's another one where I would probably go for a solid neutral color to let the stitch pattern really shine through. So this is the Chain Scarf by Knitterina. I think that's how you say her name. I was originally really excited because I looked at her bio on Instagram and I thought it said that she lived in Australia, but of course she lives in Austria. So that was a spike in excitement that I was like, oh, drats, that's a shame, because I love to find other Australian knitters. But she makes beautiful patterns by the look of it. This one that I'll pop up on screen looks again like it might be a little bit more of a detailed stitch pattern for people who want a bit more of an adventurous project. And you can only buy this through her website. I wasn't able to find it on Ravelry, so I'll be sure to include a link to her website below. And this one is sitting at around $7.50 AUD. it is only one size, but as you can see in the picture, it looks like again there's just that increase at the very start of the tip and then a long stretch of the same width, which I assume is just pattern repeat, pattern repeat, pattern repeat. So you could definitely add in some more or take out some repeats if you'd like to. And I think it would really be, it looks beautiful in that kind of neutral cream color. I could see you wearing that with just about anything, right? But it would really also, I think, look nice in a super bright pop of color, like that orangey red that's kind of around everywhere at the moment. I think that would be beautiful in this. Okay, so these last two patterns are ones perhaps for more experienced knitters or adventurous beginners because they are a little bit more complicated. So this first one is called the Scarflette pattern, and it says on the Ravelry page that actually the gauge is very important. So let me tell you what that is. It is 27 point something. I think it's a typo in my notes, but I'll put it up on the screen, but that's very precise. 27 point something stitches by 32 rows. And they use one skein of fingering weight yarn. So it again could be a pretty nice one for that special fingering weight skein of yarn in your stash, assuming you can get the right gauge count. And the pattern actually is charted as well for those of you who prefer charts for things like lace. And the final scarf I'd like to mention is the distance scarf. And this is one which again might be for not a pure beginner or a very fresh beginner, but someone who has some experience with cables, because it does have an all over cable pattern, which I think would look lovely around the neck. It has a slightly more round edge. It's not as tapered as the Sophie scarf, but it does look beautiful. And I think the cables would really add some interest to making up the project. The only downside I can think of is that because it's a cable pattern, you might have a wrong side, whereas the rest of the patterns that we've spoken about today are completely reversible, so it doesn't matter which way you pull it on and which way you knot it up. Whereas this one might be a little bit more finicky to make sure that the edge or the side with the cables is facing out. So something to think about there, but a very lovely pattern. And again, this one has two sizes as well. And I think the color in the reference photo is beautiful, that kind of deep green. I think with the cables, I might stay away from super bright colors myself personally, but I think you could really go for anything in that deeper kind of jewel toned family again, and it would look really, really lovely. So that's all of the patterns that I've found as alternatives to the Sophie scarf that check all of my boxes with the neat edge and the similar sort of shape, and alternatives for different sizes as well in the same pattern. So now comes to the time where I have to settle on which pattern I'll use to make my next gift knit. And I'm going back and forth actually between the Solo Scarf by Kadri and the Scarf number 4 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. Ugh. I think between the two of them, actually, and the Minou Scarf, because it would be pretty cool to try out doing half brioche, and I could do just a little sampler to see if I actually can do half fisherman's rib or half brioche. But the other ones are such simple TV knits. Oh. You know what? I think I'll go with the Minou Scarf. And here's my reasoning. My reasoning is I think I could probably figure out how to do the Solo Scarf or the Scarf number 4 just from looking at the reference photos. I'm not saying I'd do it perfectly, but I could probably get it close enough that it would work for me. Whereas when I look at the picture of the Minou Scarf, that is absolutely something I'm not figuring out by myself. I think that buying the pattern would definitely teach me how to do something that I wouldn't be able to put together myself without a whole lot of work and some math, which I don't want to do. And I like the fact that the Minou scarf has those 3 distinct sizes, including the much smaller one for the headband, because sometimes you do have smaller amounts of scraps in your stash that you'd like to turn into something and not just throw out and or give away, or turn into a scraps project. And I think the headband is probably a great way to do away with those little scraps. Okay, I'm going to commit to doing the Minou scarf for my next gift knit project. Yes, okay, nice. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this roundup video of Sophie Scarf alternatives. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you've seen some other Sophie Scarf alternatives that you've got your eye on, because I would like to add them to my Ravelry bundle for future projects, because I really think I might be obsessed with this accessory for a while, this category of accessory. So thank you so much for joining me for another video. I hope you're enjoying them so far. And if you liked the video, found it useful at all, I would be stoked if you were to like the video, maybe even leave me a comment so that we can have a bit of a chat. And of course, I would be over the moon if you would subscribe to the channel so that we can hang out in the future with future videos. So thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one.